Khalif Battle is planning to work out with over half the teams in the NBA what he needs to do to make sure he's selected in the 2025 NBA draft.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first bet of $5 or more wins. Well, there's an update that's kind of a non-update around the Pac-12 media rights deal, which is expected to come out very, very soon. We're not actually going to get into that today. We are going to talk about that later this week when we do find out more about that media rights deal. But we wanted to do what will be the first of a handful of NBA draft profiles here in the month of June between now and June 25th, which will be the first round of the NBA draft. We're going to talk about every one of the players on Gonzaga's roster from last year who we think could conceivably get drafted or get signed. We'll talk Khalif Battle, Ben Gregg, Ryan Nembhard, and Nolan Hickman. Today's episode is going to be about Khalif Battle. We'll talk about his hoops history, his measurements, which in this case were from the Portsmouth Invitational, his strengths and weaknesses as an NBA draft prospect, his likelihood of getting selected in the draft, some team fits, some other predictions about Battle's future, all of that here on today's show. So we'll start with Khalif Battle's history. We won't go fully into all the details of his pre-playing career prior to Gonzaga, as we've already done that on a handful of episodes, and many of you already kind of know the Khalif Battle story, but he's a 6'5" guard from New Jersey, well-traveled college basketball career. He was an unheralded recruit who started his career at Butler, but played very little for the Bulldogs, just 24 games, 11 minutes per game, 3 points per game, before he hit the transfer portal for the first time and landed at Temple. He then spent the next 3 years of his college basketball career at Temple playing for the Owls. He played 45 games in those 3 years, which is part of the reason he had multiple other years of eligibility after that, because he dealt with serious injuries. I think he played 11 games, 7 games, and then 27 games in his 3 years at Temple. 19 of those games he started while with the Owls, played about 32 minutes per game, though. He was a big-time player for them, even when he was coming off the bench. All told, in his 3 years with the Owls, he averaged just under 18 points per game. He led the American Athletic Conference in free throw percentage in the 22-23 season at just under 90%. And after that third season, which was his only kind of full season at Temple when he played those 27 games, he was good enough in that full season to get the attention of Eric Musselman, who was at the time with the Arkansas Razorbacks. Battle was one of what felt like 10 guard additions by Coach Muss in the transfer portal. And unsurprisingly, Arkansas had a depth issue, a logjam in the backcourt, and really struggled kind of that entire season. This was in 23-24 to kind of figure out who was going to play where and what and when. And there was some interpersonal issues on that Arkansas team. And it was really just a big old mess. And Eric Musselman left after the year to go to USC. And of course, John Calipari came in and kind of revamped everything at Arkansas. But Khalif Battle was pretty darn good when he was with the Hogs, particularly at the end of the year. He finished that one season at Arkansas averaging about 15 points, a little over 3 rebounds per game, shot 35% from three, but 87% at the free throw line. But he got absolutely en fuego at the end of the year. The final 7 games, he scored 20 or more in every single one of them. That included 42 against Missouri, 36 against Vanderbilt, 34 at Kentucky. All told, in those 7 games, he averaged 29.5 points per game, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, shot 35.5% from three, and 93.5% from the free throw line, which in and of itself, 93.5% from the line across any stretch is insane. And you may be thinking, well, 7 games, a lot of guys can shoot 93%. I mean, in 7 games, you might just go 13 of 14. Here's the deal. Battle averaged 13 free throw attempts per game in that 7-game stretch. He was literally taking 13 and a half free throws per game. I think in the Kentucky game, he went 17 of 18 from the line. He just went absolutely crazy, getting to the line, converting at the line, and just taking over for Arkansas. That, among many other things, led Gonzaga to pursue him out of the transfer portal, and he came to Gonzaga and had I think, as clearly defined of an up and down season as you can define it. Khalif Battle either scored 20 points or less than 10. And that's a slight exaggeration, but also not really. I think 2/3 of his conference games for Gonzaga last year were either under 10 points or over 20. He was that kind of rocket. You didn't really know what you were going to get, but he could either completely take over or completely disappear. All told, he averaged 13.5 points, shot just under 35% from three. He was third in the country in free throw percentage at 93.2%, which of course led the WCC as well on about 4 attempts per game. But again, he didn't get to the line nearly as often at Gonzaga as he did at Arkansas or at Temple, or even, well, not at Butler, but at the other places. But the issue I think for Gonzaga was, it was hard to get downhill. It's hard to get to the rim when the paint is being taken up by either Graham Ike or Braden Huff or both. And so I think that it just limited his ability to do what he does best at Gonzaga. I think there was also just some fit things that it just took a little bit of time for him to find it. He was a better scorer towards the end of the year than he was at the beginning of the year. And I think that was just him getting more comfortable in that system, in that setup. He also got in foul trouble quite a bit, which I think hurt his ability to stay on the floor and contributed to some of those just kind of absent games that we got from him. Battle was not invited to the NBA Draft Combine or the G League Elite Camp. However, he was one of 64 graduating seniors who was invited to the Portsmouth Invitational Tournament, or the PIT, which is an event that takes place in Virginia prior to the G League Elite Camp or the Draft Combine. And it's a good place for players like Battle, who are probably not highly regarded draft prospects, to get in front of some scouts and get some workouts in. They also do measurements at the Portsmouth Invitational Tournament. So we got a chance to get a look at Khalif Battle's testing and some drills and agility stuff. So here's a quick rundown of that. He measured at 6'4.25", and that was with shoes on. So if he'd been at the Draft Combine, he probably would have measured closer to 6'3". He's got 8'2.5" standing reach. He's 195 pounds, which every time I assume Gonzaga was underlisting Khalif Battle at 195 pounds because the man looked like he was 230. He looks a lot bigger. He was 1 pound heavier than Nolan Hickman. And I have a hard time believing that. I don't think the scales are wrong, but that surprises me. Let's put it that way. Also, Khalif Battle only has a 6'5" wingspan. That is a huge deterrent, unfortunately, for Khalif Battle. Nolan Hickman, for the record, has a 6'7" wingspan. Khalif Battle is just not a particularly long guy, and it's really limiting. I mean, 6'4" is a fine size for his position, but the lack of wingspan is going to hurt him by a lot of scouting metrics and is going to hurt his stock going into the draft. He did test well in some of the drills, though. His 31.5-inch vertical jump was tied for the 7th best at the pit. His 2.87 second lane agility score was the 3rd fastest, behind Bez Mebang and David Negesin. And then his 3.14 second three-quarter court sprint was actually the 2nd fastest of anybody at the pit, behind Utah and St. John's guard Devin Smith. So he's one of the fastest players at the Portsmouth Invitational event, one of the best in terms of lane agility, and one of the better jumpers. So again, again, this is comparing him to other players who are primarily not expected to be drafted, and comparing him to players at the combine, he's not going to fare nearly as well. But these are still quality testing numbers to prove the athleticism, at least for Battle, is very, very legitimate. He also played well in the scrimmages. There was 3 scrimmages in total at the pit. In the second one in particular, he was named the player of the game in a 95-87 win for his squad. He had 23 points, 3 boards, and a pair of steals. He was 8 of 18 from the field. He was also playing great defensively, picking up guys at half court, just really tenacious on that end of the floor. And I think that's a big thing that's going to help him, is showing some defensive versatility. That's where I think that lane agility is going to matter, even though the wingspan and other stuff maybe aren't going to work as well in his favor. Battle reported after a workout with the Sacramento Kings that he has had 6 NBA workouts with NBA clubs so far. He also reported that he is hoping to have 12 to 14 more, which is an insane number. That means he could conceivably work out with somewhere between 18 to 20 of the teams in the NBA, about 2/3 of the teams in the NBA. Now, again, these kind of workouts, sometimes they're private, as in the program does not, the NBA franchise does not reveal who's coming to work out. Sometimes they're individual. They're just bringing in 1 player or 2 to 3 players to give him somebody to work out against, and they're not reporting it. Sometimes they are more widely reported. There's just a lot of kind of variance in this stat. So for Battle, he's getting a look from a bunch of different teams because most of them kind of are not expecting him to be drafted. So they're looking at him of hey, is this a guy we want to bring to Summer League? Is this a guy we might want to try to bring onto our G League team, either on a two-way contract or just like bring him onto the roster so we can get a closer look at him and potentially promote him or sign him to a two-way at another point in the season? It makes sense that a ton of teams want to look at Khalif Battle because he's likely going to be a player that ends up available to just about anybody if he does not get selected in the draft. We'll talk more about that later in the show, but it again, that the amount of teams being interested in working out Khalif Battle, which it's self-reported, so you got to take that with a bit of grain of salt, but also it's like Cooper Flagg's going to work out with 19 less teams than Khalif Battle because everybody knows Cooper Flagg's not going to be available after pick number 1. So again, like Battle working out with more teams is not necessarily a promising sign for him getting drafted, but rather a sign that teams are at least wanting to evaluate him if he does end up becoming available after the draft. So what are Khalif Battle's strengths and weaknesses? We know some of them, but we're going to take a little bit more of a deep dive into that. And then we're going to close out the show talking about his actual likelihood of getting selected, where we think is going to happen with him in a couple of weeks. We're going to get to all of that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA playoffs. In fact, the NBA finals, they're in full swing. We're going to talk more about that later this week as Game 3 is coming up between the Pacers and Thunder. And every night has been delivering highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, can't-miss moments, whether it's a game-winning shot like we've seen multiple times from Tyrese Halliburton, whether it's a breakout player. Hello, Andrew Nemhard. There has never been a better time than right now to get in on all the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game both before tip-off and live. So with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And folks, the Thunder are 5-point favorites in Game 3 on the road against the Indiana Pacers if you want to get in on that action. Or if you're looking ahead to the 2026 college hoop season, Gonzaga plus 3,000 to win it all in 2026. And if you're new to FanDuel, now's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet, and you will get $200 in bonus bets if that bet wins. Folks, make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still going through our NBA draft profile on Gonzaga guard Khalif Battle, one of 4 that we will be doing here on Locked On Zags alongside Ryan Nemhard, Ben Gregg, and Nolan Hickman. We may do a show where we talk about some of these Zag adjacent players in the NBA draft, whether it be former Zag Hunter Salas, former Zag commit Alex Tui, former Washington State and Eastern Washington player Cedric Coward. We may end up talking about some of those guys later this month as well. But for now, we're going to continue to focus on Khalif Battle, who reported he has worked out with 7 NBA teams already and has plans to work out with 10 plus more NBA teams over the next couple of weeks. We talked about Battle's history, his time at Butler, Arkansas, and Temple, as well as his season at Gonzaga and his performance since the season ended, including in the Portsmouth Invitational. Now I just want to take a more overarching look at Khalif Battle's strengths and weaknesses as it pertains to the NBA. So things that he was good at in college may not necessarily translate to the NBA and vice versa. We'll kind of talk about some of that stuff. From a strength perspective, the first one is very obvious. Khalif Battle is exceptional not only at getting fouled and getting to the free throw line, but he is capital E exceptional. Doesn't even feel like the best at converting from the charity stripe. Khalif Battle gets you points guaranteed based on his ability to draw contact, get to the line, and convert from the stripe. This is a elite, transferable NBA skill that he possesses, and it is the top thing on scouting reports when evaluating Khalif Battle from a positive perspective. If you're a scout and you're looking at him and you're trying to think, what are the things he does that we think could translate right now into an NBA game, this is number one. His ability, he's so good at contorting his body, at using his strength and physicality, at just kind of at maneuvering his way around the rim. And I think finishing is something that scouts might have a bit of a question about, just because, his size, his physicality is something he relied on a lot in college that he won't be able to rely on as easily in the NBA. He's not going to be a bad NBA athlete, but I hesitate to even say he will be a good NBA athlete. He will be fine. His athleticism is fine. It's enough that it's not a weakness for him going into the NBA, but his ability to draw contact and get to the line against WCC caliber bigs will be much more difficult against NBA caliber bigs. That's not rocket science, obviously, but it does dilute a little bit of this strength while still, I think he's still good enough at this for it to be a positive for him. And I think the easiest thing that you can see in his game translating to the next level. Battle also scores well off the dribble, particularly going downhill with his right hand. He's a menace in transition. He's great at again, attacking the basket and it's scoring off of the dribble. The catch and shoot stuff, some of the other scoring stuff is maybe not there, but scoring off the dribble is a pretty clear plus check for Khalif Battle at this point. He's also shown flashes of quality playmaking and passing and floor vision. And I say flashes because he hasn't shown it consistently. He's never been asked to be an on-ball player. He was not asked to do that. And even at Arkansas, kind of towards the end of the year, when I think that the Hogs were just kind of giving him the ball and letting him go, they weren't asking him to create for others. They weren't asking him to play make. They were asking him to score. And he was like, okay, I can do that. He's never had high assist numbers, in part because he's never been asked to be a passer, but also he hasn't shown that with a lot of consistency. He had some great eye-popping passes at times last year, but again, not a super consistent skill of his. But also, again, the NBA teams are not looking at Khalif Battle as a point guard. They are looking at him as an off-ball microwave type scorer, and the floor vision and passing skills aren't necessarily super relevant to that. So I think that this is a pro in the sense that he's fine at it when he does do it, but he doesn't do it all that much, and I think that's fine. He also moves well without the basketball on offense. That's a key one when we talk about kind of undersized two guards who have thrived in the NBA. It's very rare. It's very difficult. The one example that a lot of people like to use is CJ McCollum. And the reason that CJ McCollum is so good in the NBA is he is one of the best, if not the best, off-ball mover in the entire sport. Every year, the NBA runs data on who ran the most miles, who took the most steps in the NBA last season. How they pull this data is well beyond my pay grade, but CJ McCollum frequently shows up as number one on this list. He is somebody who moves exceptionally well without the ball. It is a valuable skill, especially for two guards, especially non-shooting two guards. Khalif Battle does this, not at that elite level necessarily, but he is good at moving without the ball, at relocating, at cutting, at timing his cuts. At a lot of those various offensive skills that in this case are valuable for him because it's a skill he possesses that doesn't require him to have the ball in his hands. He's also strong for his position. The athletic testing backs that up. Again, not an elite NBA athlete, but a fine, adequate NBA athlete. And he's a hardworking defender who uses his physicality to be disruptive when guarding on the ball. Again, some of that will be mitigated by playing against higher level athletes, but he is a hardworking player on that end of the floor who I think can develop into a quality defensive wing in the NBA. Weaknesses for Khalif Battle, he's an inconsistent outside shooter. I think if you were to pick a skill that Khalif Battle, if you were to pick a skill to improve for Khalif Battle, like if you were playing like college basketball 2025, if that ever comes out, or like, Madden or something like that, and you could pick one of the attributes to just move it up as high as possible, for Khalif Battle would be three-point shooting. Spoiler alert, for most players, it's three-point shooting. It's like the most valuable skill you can have in the NBA. But for Battle in particular, it's devastating that it's not a super passable NBA skill right now. He's not a terrible three-point shooter, but it's tough to expect the three-point shooting to translate to the NBA when he was very inconsistent every year he was in college. He was always like a 35-36% three-point shooter. So he was consistently inconsistent. I think that there's a potential, I've talked about this before, when you go into the NBA and you're now a professional basketball player and you're not in classes and you're not worrying about anything other than staying in the NBA or staying at the pro ranks, and three-point shooting is a skill you need to work on, you're just going to spend your entire life in the gym. Like, that's the only thing you're going to do. And that's why you see players get better at three-point shooting. Andrew Nembhard's a good example. Kelly Olynyk's a good example. Chad Holmgren, like guys who played at Gonzaga got better as three-point shooters in the league because of this. I think Khalif Battle could do that, but right now it's a big enough deterrent that you have to get to the league in order to improve on those skills. And it's a big enough deterrent right now that it could keep him out of even making it to the league. Other weaknesses for Battle, he's spotty shot selection. He can get tunnel vision. He can make bad decisions. On that same note, he can get out of control. Khalif Battle was one of the most out of control players in recent Gonzaga history from my memory. He would, especially if he got sped up a little bit, if he got a little emotional, if the opposing team was getting to him, he was missing his shots, he was getting a little frustrated. He would fly down the court. He would turn the ball over, make a stupid mistake, try to do too much. Like, that is an area of maturity that's not really there for Khalif and will be held against him, especially because, and segueing into another weakness, he's pretty old. He's old for a draft prospect. And that means that scouts are going to view him as more of a finished product. Is he a finished product? No. But is he more finished than an 18-year-old? Yeah, of course. Of course he is. And for Battle, he's an older prospect. He's got a little bit less upside in the eyes of scouts and analysts. He also has an injury history, which I think will be used against him potentially as well. Again, any team that's looking at him is going to bring him in and do some testing on that regard. But I think the fact that he has been injured a lot, he is an older prospect, is going to work against him, especially when compared to some of those other weaknesses, specifically the three-point shooting, which I think is the biggest deterrent right now for Battle in terms of him being drafted before the second round is done. So let's talk about that. How likely is it that Khalif Battle will get selected on June 26th when the second round is happening? And what are the best fits for his skills in the NBA? We're going to break that down to close out the show coming up in just a second. All right, folks, closing out the show, continuing our conversation about Khalif Battle in the first of what will be at least 4 NBA draft profiles between now and June 25th when the NBA draft gets going. We'll, of course, talk Ryan Nembhard, Ben Gregg, and Nolan Hickman as well. But today was focused exclusively on our guy, Khalif Battle. Talked about his strengths, his weaknesses, his performance at the Portsmouth Invitational, the workouts that he has already had and is planning to have. And now we're going to talk about the actual draft range, the likelihood that he gets selected in the draft later this month, as well as some team fit stuff and kind of just a general projection of what his kind of likely outcome is at the next level. So we'll start with the draft range. Most places are not projecting Khalif Battle to get drafted. And in fact, after doing a fair amount of research on the most upgraded mock drafts from various outlets, NBA Draft, No Ceilings, ESPN, Yahoo, The Ringer, various media outlets that do this, he's not showing up on the mock drafts. And honestly, even the places that do big boards, most of them didn't have him on there either. There was a few places that had top 60 big boards, top 80 big boards that did not have him on there. I think at this point, any top 80 or top 100 big board should probably feature Khalif Battle. A few of these were the most updated big boards that the sites had, but they still had guys like LeBaron Philon and Todd Pettiford, who have already announced they are returning to school. So those are a little bit out of date. And when they are updated, if they are updated by those media outlets, I think that will allow Khalif Battle to sneak into that conversation. In fact, that's a big part of Khalif Battle's potential draft stock, is the fact that so many of these talented players opted to return to school. And we talked about it from the context of Ryan Nembhard in particular, because so many of those players were like pure point guards like Philon and Boogie Fland, who went to Florida, and Todd Pettiford, who went to Auburn, or Otega Owe, or Milos Uzon, who returned to Kentucky and Houston. Like, those were guys that were going to get drafted. And in many cases, were going to get drafted ahead of Ryan Nembhard and ahead of Khalif Battle, who are now returning to school instead of being in the draft process. So that clears out room for more of these kind of senior guys who are out of eligibility, who have some NBA tangible skills to potentially lead. That could potentially lead those guys to getting selected in the draft. The only place that had Khalif Battle on a big board was NBADraft.net. Their big board, which was updated on June 1st, has Khalif Battle up 10 spots from their latest update to 63 overall on the big board. In fact, he's only 4 spots behind Ryan Nembhard, who they have at 59 on this big board. So we are seeing a few places that have some updates, some interest in him, some potential kind of thoughts that he could be somebody sneaking into the back half of that second round. And then in terms of team fits for Khalif Battle, he's kind of a weird one where there's not really any obvious like his fit for various teams is kind of the same. Like, there's not certain teams that are like, oh, they're more desperately in need of a player like this, and other teams where it's like, oh, they totally don't need a guy like this. Like, Ryan Nembhard's going to have more like, okay, that team needs a backup point guard, and that team does not need a pass first point guard, and therefore they're not going to be as interested in him. Whereas with Battle, like, a rebuilding team might view him as a possible tank commander. in the same way that not the same way stylistically, but like Drew Timme was a tank commander this last year. He was the Brooklyn Nets promoted him at a time in the season when they were no longer competing and no longer had playoff aspirations and were basically trying to get the best draft spot they possibly could. And that's not to say Drew Timme is bad. It's to say that he was given an opportunity to play at the NBA level because of the timing of the season. And then he played well. More specific examples that are like Khalif Battle would be like a Delano Banton. For those of you who are Blazers fans, I know there's not a ton of crossover, but for those of you who are Blazers fans, you may know the name Delano Banton. He played at times for this Blazers team when they were kind of already out of contention and would play bigger minutes when they were resting starting guards or just sitting those guys, and would play pretty well and looked good, but it's like he was being featured in a role that is not a role that he would typically have on a contending team. And I could see that functioning well for Khalif Battle of like, hey, it's the end of the year. Let's bring this guy up from the G League and let him cook. And because he's old enough and because he's playing against mostly younger guys at the end of the regular season, he could look really good in that role. I could totally see that happening for Khalif Battle. I could also see a contending team wanting to bring him in, either in the second round or as an undrafted free agent of like, hey, this guy's older. I mean, he's one of the older players in the draft process. He's older. He's a veteran guy. He's proven it at multiple levels at a high-level program in Gonzaga and a high-level conference in the SEC. And he's got this ability to potentially come off the bench and score a bunch of points in a hurry. And that's valuable. That's valuable to a contending team. They're not going to bring him in to be a sixth man. He's maybe going to be more like a ninth guy or a 10th guy, but he could hold some value with prominent contending NBA teams, as well as holding value for some of those like rebuilding tanking teams. So I find him and again, I think that some of this is proven by the fact that he's potentially going to work out with as many as 20 different NBA teams, because he does have potential value for any type of NBA team, whether they're a contending team, a pretending team, a tanking team. I think that Battle could kind of fit various different ways, which I think is helpful for him in his quest to be in the NBA next season. I'll throw an NBA comp on him too. I don't know if I'm going to do this for everybody. NBA comps are a bit challenging, but I'm going to throw one out there that I think makes sense stylistically, play-wise, and the fact that these guys both played at Arkansas, and that's Ricky Council. Ricky Council the fourth, who played at Wichita State and at Arkansas during his college career. He was 6'6", really good free throw shooter, really good at getting to the free throw line, great line driver, not a good three-point shooter. So the basic comparison to Khalif Battle is pretty obvious. Ricky Council is a guy who came into the NBA, he didn't get drafted, came into the NBA, played well in the G League, played well in the Summer League, and eventually got an opportunity to prove himself at the NBA level. And this past year really fully took advantage of that. It was his second year in the NBA, but he played 73 games for the Philadelphia 76ers. Yeah, they were very terrible this year, but that's, again, I think that could be a role for Battle to play big minutes on a not very good NBA team. Ricky Council, 73 games last year for the 76ers, started 12 of them, averaged 7.5 points, 3 boards, 1.3 assists in about 17 minutes per game. He shot 25.8% from three because he was not a good three-point shooter in college, and that did not translate into the NBA, but he also shot 80.4% from the free throw line. This is the kind of thing Khalif Battle could do. He could be this type of player. It's probably a best case scenario for Khalif Battle is to do the Ricky Council route where you end up on a team like this and you play, 17 minutes across 73 games. That's a full-time, consistent rotation player in the NBA. That's probably the best case scenario for Khalif Battle, but it is absolutely doable. And the fact that a player like Council was able to do it, I think further proves that point. I think the most likely outcome for Khalif Battle looks something like this. I don't think he's going to get drafted. I would be quite surprised. Things could change between now and June 25th, but I would be pretty surprised if Khalif Battle was selected in the NBA draft. But I think he will sign fairly quickly after the draft. I'm confident enough in that I'm probably not going to record right when the second round is over, because I think between him and Greg and Hickman, I don't think any of them get drafted, but I think multiple of them end up signing with NBA teams ahead of Summer League, potentially right after the second round concludes. And I don't expect Khalif Battle to instantly sign a two-way contract, but rather to sign with a team to be brought into Summer League to compete to be on a two-way contract, to compete in Summer League to potentially get a deal with that team to be brought into training camp, where you would then compete to get into that two-way contract. If that does not happen for him, I could see him going overseas, but I could also see him staying in the G League. Khalif Battle, and I've said this on the show before, he strikes me as a player that will thrive in the G League. The G League tends to have a little bit less structure. It tends to have a lot of kind of isolation basketball and one-on-one and just driving to the hoop and trying to score. And I think Battle could thrive in that environment, put up big numbers. By the way, this applies to the summer league as well, where there's even less coaching. I mean, the summer league, everybody comes together and they start playing immediately. There's no time to run plays and stuff. So it's a lot of just guys trying to show off. And I think Khalif Battle could really thrive in that environment. And I think he ends up staying in the G League. That's what I ultimately think. Yes, he could go overseas, but I think he stays in the G League, and I think he plays his way into a two-way contract. Does it happen in year one? I don't know. It took Drew Timme a while, but it could happen for Khalif Battle. And Drew Timme never signed a two-way. He eventually just signed a full-on NBA contract. But Battle, I think, would thrive in the G League environment. And if he wants to make the NBA, you can go overseas and yeah, you can make more money. It's a bit more secure, but the play style doesn't fit him as well in most overseas leagues. And also the odds of then making the NBA from overseas are really difficult. Whereas if you're in the country already, you're playing in the G League, you're getting seen by NBA scouts, your odds of actually getting up to the league, again, ask Drew Timme, that's what he did, your odds increase. So that's like what I think is the path here for Khalif Battle. And I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to see how it goes. Khalif Battle said some wonderful things about Gonzaga in a recent media appearance with the Sacramento Kings during one of his workouts. Said he went to Gonzaga because of how, said, I can't think of a bad player that came out of Gonzaga in the NBA. Like, they developed talent really well. It was the best decision I ever made. And I think, you know, through all the ups and downs, we really loved having Khalif Battle. And I really hope the best for him. And I would love to see him succeed in the NBA or in the professional ranks. And I think there is a path for him to get into the NBA. It may not be as straightforward as getting drafted and signing a contract and playing, but I think it's there. And I'm excited to see how it shakes out for him. It's going to wrap it up for us today here in the Locked On Zags podcast. Again, we'll be back this week. We'll get you caught up to date on what's going on with the Pac-12, the media rights deal, which might be announced very, very soon, the grant of rights agreement, all that stuff. We'll also keep you up to date on recruiting, transfer portal updates. Of course, we'll do more of these NBA draft profiles as well. Thanks again, folks, for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And of course, as always, go Zags.